In the Sermon on the Mount, Jesus calls us to a higher standard of obedience than that taught by the scribes and Pharisees. Not a surface level, going through the motions, checking the boxes kind of obedience, but an obedience from the heart. In Matthew chapter 5 and verse 21, Jesus begins a series of statements where he says, "You have heard that it was said, such and such, but I say to you." And Jesus here isn't primarily addressing the law of Moses. Most of the time when he quotes from the Old Testament scriptures, he says, "It is written." But here he says, "You have heard that it was said." He is primarily addressing the way in which the scribes and Pharisees corrupted the old law and had an imbalanced emphasis in how they taught it. In Matthew 5, verse 21 and 22, Jesus begins by saying, "You have heard that the ancients were told, 'You shall not commit murder,' and whoever commits murder shall be liable to the court. But I say to you that everyone who is angry with his brother shall be guilty before the court. And whoever says to his brother, 'You good for nothing,' shall be guilty before the Supreme Court. And whoever says, 'You fool,' shall be guilty enough to go into the fiery hell." The scribes and Pharisees were only concerned with what was convictable in a human court of law: murder. And Jesus hasn't come to abolish this law and say that in his kingdom murder's okay. No, he's come to fulfill it, to go deeper, to get to the heart of the law, and to get them to consider what is convictable in the divine court of justice. Anger harbored within our hearts, resentful attitudes, hurtful speech. God calls us to a higher standard of obedience because God doesn't see the way that man sees. He sees what is going on inside of our hearts. And so that's where kingdom righteousness has to begin, with cultivating the kind of heart and attitude that reflects the character of our King.